Hi everybody, we're back, and this time we're looking at the healing brush tool. The healing brush tool fixes large areas of imperfection when you drag over them, and that's by making a selection. You have to use Alt, just like Clone Stamp tool, to make your selection of a piece of something, and then drag it over the piece you would like to fix. Remember that the pixels within that selection you choose have to be kind of relatable or similar to the pixels you're replacing. You can remove objects from a uniform background, such as an object in a field of grass. In this case, I'm looking at a farmer's field with big tractor trailer tracks and just thought, what would it look like without those? So the idea here is to choose the healing brush over here on my enhancement area of my menu, this little grid of what looks like 6 tools with tons of tools underneath. And I would normally see spot healing brush. I come and click on that and I can move over to healing brush. A couple things to be aware of first is my brush size and my brush settings. So right now the default is the hardest is 100%. When I look at this image, there's no blurry, so I don't want to mimic that. So I'm going to keep it the way it is. Roundness is good. I like working with a round brush tip. Aligned as well. When we're talking about aligned, we are talking about samples or pixels are continuously, it samples when I select a line. It will sample pixels continuously without losing the current sampling point, even if I release the mouse button. Meaning, when I take a sample, it'll do the sampling point, the current one, and not change as I resample. Deselect a line to continue using the sampled pixels from the initial sampling point each time you stop and resume painting. So you can play around and toggle a line if you wish. Sampled basically means what I've selected, and I do that by holding Alt down. And I got a nice little crosshair. I'll make that bigger so you can see. I'm going to hold Alt down, and I'm going to select this area of the field. Now within my selection, you can see is the picture or the piece of pixels I selected. If I don't want to see that, and that's kind of confusing me, and I don't want to, have that around, I can go under Clone Overlay down here on the Options menu. And I would say, don't show overlay. Or I could even change the opacity so I can see through. Right now, I can't see through. So if I come up here and change the opacity, I can kind of see through that a little bit. If I bring it up a little bit more, make it more obvious. I still have a pattern, but I'm lightly adding it. So I'm actually it's a way to make things look more realistic, if you ask me. You can do that, if I was going up here, we'll just say leave the opacity on and show the overlay. I'm going to zoom in by holding Alt and my mouse wheel, take a selection from up here, and now you can see that I can kind of move that over. And if I come back out, it's a large circle, so it looks a little less perfect, but we will get an idea right there of how a lower opacity can kind of blend in. And I can hold that mouse wheel down too and drag. Now, when I'm dragging, it doesn't have the same effect. I prefer the click option for being more realistic. When I go under here, though, I am going to lower the opacity again, just to give you more example here. Okay, so that's playing around with my clone overlay and my opacity. If I don't want to show overlay, I just deselect it, and when I make a selection again, I don't have that selection. Even though I do, I can't see it within my circle. I generally prefer to see the clone overlay. Now, I've done a few things I don't like, so I need to get rid of them. How do I do that? Easily and quickly. Up in the top menu, I'm going to select Window, come down to History, or hit F10, and bring it up. And this is basically a history of my actions. I can expand this if I want to see. So I can go back to the action I don't like, and it really just resets the entire image right back to open if I want. And if I was like, oh, I made a mistake, I want to come back to what I did, I can go back to the bottom step. So I'm going to go back to open so I can show you more accurately what we're doing. I'm going to keep it open so I can see what I'm doing. The other option here is we have normal. We can replace, multiply what's inside that selection I make. We can add it as a screen. We can darken, lighten it, do color, luminosity. So you can play around with these. For this case, I just want to do normal. Lower my brush size. I'm going to zoom in as much as I can here. Okay. Now we are in the zone to do some work. Now, what I wanted to pay special attention to with the healing brush tool is when I'm using it, I really don't want, I'm going to put my opacity back up. What I really don't want to do is I don't want to add a pattern from over here into the middle that doesn't fit. So if, as you can see, with that clone overlay, I can actually line up the lines to make it look a little bit more like it was meant to be. And when I do that, I would just kind of click here, right, and bring it through. Now, that's a little bit too much hardness for me than I like. And I'm going to lower that just a tiny, tiny bit. And I think I'm going to lower the opacity just a tiny, tiny bit, just to give myself a little bit more a realistic look. That's not too bad. And remember, I want to mimic. So there's a slope, then there's a bit of a stoppage in the slope there. I'm going to take a sample from maybe over here and just try to move it over there. And I almost virtually got rid of that. So I'm going to take a sample from here and move it this way, just to keep that slope effect. And now I'm up near the top. I could even go halfway up and take that right off the top, right? Take a sample from maybe over here, halfway up, and move it over there. And as you can see, I'm sort of lining up the field. Take a sample from here. And as I take a sample, I'm always hitting Alt and left clicking on the mouse button just to get myself a sample close by, sample of pixels close by to where I'm actually doing the editing. So if I zoom back out now, I have no tracks in that field anymore. And that is basically the healing brush. Now here's a note that you probably would like to know. If you're sampling from one image and applying it to another, both images have to be in the same color mode, unless one of the images is in grayscale mode. And I can do that, I believe, under here for mode. I want to make sure that we're both, if I had two images open and I was taking a sample from another image, I want to make sure they're both RGB or indexed, or, unless one's grayscale. So that's where I would change that under image and mode. And I believe that is the end of this tutorial. Oh, one more thing. Under sampled, I can also do pattern. Now you can create a pattern with the pattern stamp tool under the clone stamp tool. In this case, as you can see, this pattern is selected, but if I hit the drop-down menu, I can select any pattern. I don't necessarily want to use these patterns on a field where I can grab a pattern if I need one. So I'm not going to use the pattern at this point, but if I was to do it, let's just use the pink just for huge, contrast to show you. I would basically be adding that pattern. If I was going to go and use a pattern stamp tool, I could add pretty much anything in there. It would be in the pattern of the color that I've selected. So I'm still making the selection, but here I am adding the pattern to everything, which I don't want to do because it looks like crap. But you get the general idea. So back up to where I was. I think that was good. All right, and that's the end of that tutorial. So I would avoid the pattern stamp tool if you don't need it, or the pattern in terms of healing brush. And again, you can, one more thing to remember, you can hold Alt and just hold and make a selection, but then you can hold Alt down and drag. And if you can see very, very faintly, you can see that crosshair to the right of my circle. That's where the sample is coming from. So as I go down, it's actually picking up the pixels from that area, and you can see that it's actually staying with the pattern that I'm getting to. So, which actually kind of helps a lot. So I might have to redo it one more time here and just bring it down. But you get the idea. Again, I'm going to take a sample here, hold my mouse button down, and just drag it slowly. It takes a sample from beside me, which fits the pattern of the pixels I'm changing, and just lets me do it large swaths of change at a time. Not as realistic in my book. I prefer the click and being more precise and zooming in. Until the next one.